everybody, so with the release of Godzilla Minus One, I thought it'd be the perfect time to finally do a ranking of the entire Godzilla franchise. Almost 70 years worth of movies at this point between Toho, America, and the animated films that were on Netflix. It's quite a lot of movies, 37 in total. I've been a big fan of Godzilla for as long as I can remember. Like merchandise upon merchandise. Even this absolute behemoth that is really hard to display. But yeah, I love me some Godzilla, so make sure you share your ranking down below before I get into mine, how you'd rank the entire franchise, and let's get into my last place pick. In last place, I have Godzilla 1998. I know that's a real shocker here, but as a longtime Godzilla fan, at the heart of Roland Emmerich's film, it just is a misguided attempt at adapting the icon for an American audience. It lacks any of the elements that make a good Godzilla film, along with the really bad redesign of Godzilla himself. Bland human characters. Godzilla's killed by the military, which is another insane thing about this movie that they got wrong. Then on top of that, you throw in these babies that are ripped right out of Jurassic Park. It's one of those things that if it wasn't called Godzilla, this would just be a generic monster movie. Just because it's supposed to be technically a Godzilla film, that's why it's still remembered to this day. At number 36, I have All Monsters Attack or Godzilla's Revenge. Out of all of the Toho Godzilla films, this is the one that I've always pretty much detested, even as a child. Overall, this concept is just bizarre, where you have this kid who's bullied that dreams of being Manila's friend messing around on Monster Island. It's just an all-around mess. A large amount of this movie is basically just stock footage of previous Godzilla films. And whenever there is new footage, it doesn't look the greatest. At number 35, I have Son of Godzilla. Quite the odd era when it comes to being a Godzilla fan. That one weird time where Godzilla was kind of a slightly abusive father. This entry overall is pretty messy and disappointing. The kaiju action is lackluster. Over time, I did kind of sort of appreciate Godzilla's son a little bit more. I mean, the design is still nightmare fuel. He looks horrible. At number 34, I have Godzilla the Planet Eater. I must confess, in general, I'm not overly fond of these three animated Godzilla films that we saw on Netflix, which is a shame because it's such a cool idea, but by this point in the trilogy, a lot of that excitement has long left. The human drama lost a lot of its steam. Even the big battle here between this iteration of Godzilla and this new style of Ghidorah was just okay. At number 33, I have Ebra, Horror of the Deep. This entry, it isn't bad by any means, but it's just an overall okay adventure. I'd even say it's kind of a fun concept setting everything on this island, which isn't a location that we often see in the franchise. It's just as unfortunate that Ebra as a kaiju is just not a very exciting villain. He's just a giant lobster. At number 32, I have Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. This entry, this middle one, it's just serviceable. The conflict and war between the humans and Earth continues to be mildly compelling, along with a new take on Mechagodzilla of sorts. At number 31, I have Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. Out of all three of the movies in the trilogy, the first one I think had the most promise to it, but I don't think it ever lived up to that hype. The animation style I also found to be pretty cool, especially the style and the humongousness of this version of Godzilla. At large, these three movies are kind of wasted potential. At number 30, I have Godzilla Raids Again. I do give this sequel a lot of credit for being the first film to follow up the classic original. Formula is kind of in place here, where Godzilla faces off against another monster, here being the introduction to Anguirus. And that stuff is fun, but you can really tell when you watch this it was a rushed production. It just feels very thrown together quite quickly. The story here isn't as engaging. Out of many of the sequels in this franchise, it's one I don't rewatch all that often, but I do respect it. At number 29, I have Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. This entry is one I've always had kind of mixed feelings on. It's definitely by far my least favorite of the Heisei era. Kind of a retread of ideas that we've seen before. Godzilla facing off against yet another version of himself. But the main kicker here, though, is Space Godzilla's design is just so damn cool. Even disregarding his kind of insane origin. But the over-the-top elements with the kaiju action, especially in that third act, make up for the human story being kind of lackluster. In 28th place, I have Godzilla 2000. After how much of a disaster Roland Emmerich's Godzilla film was, I was pretty happy that Toho responded back almost instantaneously with Godzilla 2000, which it did actually come out in Japan in 1999. Even if Godzilla 2000 is a very standard back to the basics style Godzilla film that doesn't take any sort of risks. Big surprise at the end that there is going to be a new kaiju, Orga. Orga as a character was nothing special in my opinion. At large, Godzilla 2000 kind of just felt like a good palate cleanser to get us back on the right track for the rest of this era. Coming in at number 27, I have Godzilla Tokyo SOS. The second part to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, this entry is just very serviceable. I don't have too much to say about it. It's fun. It's a very run-of-the-mill, entertaining. You can't go wrong with this first one because of just the sheer amount of kaiju action in this installment from everyone involved. In 26th place, I have Godzilla vs. Megalon. I consider this entry to be a guilty pleasure of mine. Is the movie absolutely ridiculous and goofy? Definitely, but that's some of the charm to it in my opinion, how silly and over the top everything about Godzilla vs. Megalon is. Whether it's the human storyline where there's this underground civilization that just so happens to have a giant monster to send to stop nuclear testing, to the iconic size-changing jet jaguar. Then on top of that, you have Godzilla defying all laws of physics. It's amazing. Sure, it's not one of the best Godzilla movies or anything, but as far as the fun factor goes, I have a blast with this one. Number 25, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Quite the divisive entry in the franchise. I get so much joy out of Godzilla King of the Monsters, largely thanks to how fantastic the action is in this film. You've got Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah raising mayhem, and this version showcases just the overall massive scale of these titans. And it's pure perfection in each and every battle, but the third act I think is the most epic battle and probably one of my favorites of this MonsterVerse so far. Sure, like a lot of these American Godzilla films, the human elements are fairly weak. The action here is so damn good that I can kind of just ignore them entirely. In 24th place, I have Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. Once Godzilla 2000 kind of got the ball rolling as far as Toho doing Godzilla movies again, I've always found this entry to be solid but very underrated. As far as this entire franchise goes, you don't see too many people ever talking about Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. While we would see a lot in this era that it's yet another direct sequel to the original Godzilla film, it manages to keep things interesting, introducing these giant insects that terrorize people before Godzilla faces off against Megaguirus. It's simple, solid, effective, but yeah, are there actually like Godzilla vs. Megaguirus fans out there? Because I don't know too many of them. At number 23, Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Outside of maybe All Monsters Attack, this is probably the strangest entry in the entire franchise, but it's a wild psychedelic trip that I quite love, and its message about the environment makes for a uniqueness that you don't get out of most Godzilla films, especially when you consider the fact that he's facing a monster made out of pollution. He still manages to be a solid yet kind of weird antagonist for Godzilla once we do finally see them face off. Number 22, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, which is just an insane title for a movie. Everything about this movie I just found to be so badass. It's just a delight to watch. Even if the overall look and redesign of Godzilla here has always creeped me out, I've never been a big fan of just the white eyes that he has in this. At number 21, I have Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Out of the several different movies that we've seen where Godzilla faces off against Mechagodzilla, this one probably has the most wild concept behind it, mainly because that this iteration of Mechagodzilla is built out of the remains of the original Godzilla, and that's not even considering the fact that he's not Mechagodzilla, he's called Kiryu. It's extremely entertaining and fast-paced with some really cool Godzilla sequences. It's a fast, easy breezy kind of watch. I'm always surprised at how short this movie is. At number 20, I have Godzilla Final Wars. For being the culmination of 50 years of Godzilla, this movie is extremely ambitious, maybe a bit too ambitious for what it's trying to accomplish. You can't deny the fact that Godzilla Final Wars is an amazing blast to watch, mainly because of just the sheer volume of kaiju action. Pretty much any kaiju you can think of, popular or not so popular, has some moment to shine in Godzilla Final Wars. Human stuff in this is pretty over-the-top outrageous, very much inspired by The Matrix. Don Fry is pretty awesome. That is one thing I will give the human characters. You can't go wrong with how badass Don Fry is. At number 19, I have Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Being someone that loves Mechagodzilla as a character, these entries are always going to be ones that I have a soft spot for. Once again, it is kind of fascinating how we get these new iterations of Mechagodzilla. In this instance, this iteration of Mechagodzilla is crafted out of the remains of Mecha King Ghidorah. Conflict in this one is a little bit out there. All in all, I do get some fun out of watching this one, just mainly due to the chaos of Godzilla, Rodan, and Mechagodzilla duking it out. At number 18, I have Godzilla 2014. After the 1998 film got so much wrong, I was left much more satisfied with what Gareth Edwards delivered to kick off the MonsterVerse and this new version of Godzilla. This version of Godzilla sets the tone well. Engaging human drama that sadly kind of does leave the movie once Bryan Cranston's character dies. In my opinion, it's one of the biggest mistakes the MonsterVerse has done is killing off Bryan Cranston. This is one of the best looking Godzilla films visually. Pretty awesome kaiju kaiju action between Godzilla and the Mutos. As much as I love the movie, it is difficult sometimes to watch the film at home just because of how dark those sequences are. Still a pretty entertaining introduction to the MonsterVerse, and it's been great seeing it expanded more in the rest of the MonsterVerse films, and also Monarch Legacy of Monsters. That's been a lot of fun covering on the channel if you haven't been following my coverage of it so far. At number 17, I have the return of Godzilla. Pretty great return for the franchise, kicking off this new era of Godzilla. Something I always appreciated about the return of Godzilla is the darker interpretation of Godzilla, shifting things back tonally to what we saw before back in the original film in 1954. It's just Godzilla versus humanity with some exciting, better looking effects for the time. So yeah, pretty solid kickoff for the Heisei era. At number 16, I have Terror of Mechagodzilla. Even though I don't think this movie is as good as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, I do think it is a pretty interesting, dark companion piece to that film. Getting to see this rematch between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, while even introducing a new kaiju to the bunch, Titanosaurus. One of those movies where Godzilla faces off against multiple kaiju. He just has to face off against Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus on his own with no backup, no other monsters to help him out. At number 15, I have King Kong vs. Godzilla. In all of its glorious cheesiness, this movie is just a blast watching these two iconic characters face off. It's wacky and entertaining in all of the best ways, regardless of the fact the plot to get the two of these characters together is kind of ridiculous. There's so much charm to this movie, so many memorable moments. It really doesn't matter if you're rooting for Godzilla or King Kong. It's just an all-around fun time. At number 14, I have Godzilla vs. Kong. Pretty much everything that I love about the first matchup between these two icons. This was enhanced even further in this new iteration. The spectacle of it all executed in this was pure perfection, not just in the level of creativity each time they faced off, but the visuals in Godzilla vs. Kong are next level. Which I know isn't fair to compare this movie to what we saw back in the 60s, but it's true. You can't not be hyped watching a movie like this no matter what side you're on, Team Kong or Team Godzilla. You have the amazing final battle where they team up against Mechagodzilla. It's just great popcorn style action spectacle, and I love it, and I'm excited to see where we go with the rest of the franchise after this. At number 13, I have Godzilla vs. Gigan. Though I didn't talk about Gigan all that much when I brought him up earlier in Godzilla vs. Megalon, I think he's one of the most interesting and unique foes that Godzilla has ever faced, mainly just due to the way that he's designed. I've always found him to be just so weird to look at. The entry does get a little bit wackier than some other ones. You have Godzilla and Anguirus speaking in this. The antagonists are like these alien cockroaches. And then you have this awesome amusement park for the final battle. It's just a good time. Plus you get a little bit of King Ghidorah in the movie as well. You can't go wrong with that. At number 12, I have Godzilla vs. Mothra, The Battle for Earth. This entry is one I have a lot of nostalgia for. When I was growing up, this was the one I would rent a whole bunch from Hollywood Video. Even if there was a 50-50 chance every time, it would either be this tape or Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964. What this film does lack in the Godzilla department, it makes up for with some fantastic moments for Mothra within these battles, finally having the character return after decades away. Even including one of my personal favorite kaiju that doesn't get a whole lot of love, Batra, this darker version of Mothra. And it's always bummed me out that Batra never really got a whole lot of love in the franchise to this point. I do love me some Mothra. I'm glad that after this movie's success, she went on to do her own trilogy of movies, which I do enjoy that trilogy. I do want to own them on Blu-ray one day, but sadly, the trilogy Blu-ray set is out of print and very expensive. At number 11, I have Destroy All Monsters. Films like Destroy All Monsters are a kaiju fan's dream, showcasing such a wide array of monsters all on screen together in one film. Pretty much any monster that Toho created to this point was in Destroy All Monsters. The entertainment factor for this entry is immense. Climax where they just absolutely demolish King Ghidorah altogether. Very satisfying. At number 10, I have Godzilla vs. Biollante. In my opinion, this movie and Biollante as a villain, I think both of them are some of the coolest things to come out of this franchise. Such a unique and interesting entry that dabbles into the crazy types of sci-fi that I love. Scientists combining a bunch of DNA that he probably shouldn't be. And then we get to see that horror visualized through Biollante going through all of these different stages. Till it's just completely massive and Godzilla has to face off against them. Battle between the two of them is genuinely pretty awesome. The only con to the movie is not even the movie's fault. It's the fact that it's so hard to get a physical media release of because it's out of print in the US. The Blu-ray is. It's one of the very few movies in the Godzilla franchise I don't own on physical media. At number 9, I have Shin Godzilla. There's so much about Shin Godzilla I think is so fantastic. In essence, it works effectively as a modern reboot of the 1954 film with political figures scrambling to try and figure out how to combat this horrific version of Godzilla that is continuously evolving and destroying destroying everything in its path. The evolving stuff I thought was a really unique choice, even if the first stage was kind of nightmare fuel. It's by far one of the most unique designs for Godzilla. It's probably one of the darkest entries overall of the franchise, but I think it truly packs a punch. At number 8, I have Invasion of the Astro Monster. Now, this entry is certainly one that I feel like kind of boils down to a matter of preference on how you want to watch a Godzilla film. Do you want a more serious Godzilla film, or do you want your Godzilla film to be a little bit more wacky and more sci-fi? Every now and then I like these more wacky entries. You get so much entertainment out of the wacky ideas presented in Invasion of the Astro Monster. Just the fact that they let this alien race borrow the monsters, thinking nothing would ever go wrong. And then obviously chaos does ensue. It does feature some of my favorite iconic Godzilla memes. At number 7, I have Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Even if this necessarily isn't my favorite Ghidorah film, it's still a great action-packed introduction to this amazing antagonist. When it comes to his battles here with this crazy design and his power set, you add on the fun additions of Mothra and Rodan being in the movie as well. It's no surprise after this that King Ghidorah would be a monster that shows up a whole lot more times, and arguably is Godzilla's most iconic foe. At number 6, I have Godzilla Minus One, the most recent Godzilla film. I don't want to touch upon too much just because I do have a full review if you want to check out my full thoughts, but I'm still just blown away at how excellent this new Godzilla entry is. As a lifelong Godzilla fan, Godzilla Minus One just satisfied everything I want from a Godzilla film. An emotional, riveting human story that really packs a punch all the way through. I was on the edge of my seat the entire film. And then you get to the action spectacle of it all with Godzilla. This iteration of Godzilla is horrifying, just pure ferociousness on display. This iteration is just so amazingly cool. I was extremely impressed at just how much I loved this film. At number 5, I have Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. When it comes to making your introduction into the Godzilla franchise, I don't think you could get any cooler than the way that Mechagodzilla introduces himself in this film. Tricked to believe that Godzilla's acting weird like a villain again, only to have the rug pulled out from under you where you're introduced to this new, powerful, robotic Godzilla raising mayhem with crazy weaponry. Bonkers sci-fi, considering that the villains are apes in disguise. Plus the solid roster of kaiju in this. Iconic sleepy kaiju, King Caesar. Such a fun kaiju that's introduced here. Even if, to be completely honest, I do usually skip through some of the song just because that King Caesar song goes on for so long to wake him up. At number 4, I have Mothra vs. Godzilla. Being a big fan of Mothra, her first appearance inside the Godzilla franchise is still my favorite. To me, this entry cemented all the elements to what makes a great Godzilla film. A solid, engaging narrative, an interesting adversary to take on Godzilla, and some pretty engaging kaiju battles that lend themselves well to creativity to Mothra's unique power set. Ever since I watched this movie, I've been a big fan of Mothra ever since. At number 3, I have Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. For me, this is the King Ghidorah movie that I love the most. Everything about Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is so incredibly entertaining and just so over the top. Dinosaurs fighting soldiers, time travel, cute chibi versions of King Ghidorah that end up being the replacement for Godzilla, doom humanity till a new Godzilla is birthed, and then the problem is just reversed. And then King Ghidorah comes back as Mecha King Ghidorah. It's just pure madness. Number 2, I have Godzilla vs. Destroya. I don't even know where to begin about this entry. I think pretty much everything about it is practically perfect. Man, just to ramp everything up, the stakes, the emotion, everything is exponentially higher since the whole film you watch Godzilla slowly melting down. On top of that, you throw on this conflict with Destroya, who just in this one appearance cements them as one of the most iconic adversaries that Godzilla's ever faced off against. Out of any of the Godzilla films where he faces off against another monster, I think this is one of the best showdowns of them all. Then it just hits you even deeper because at the end you have to watch Godzilla melt down and die. When I watched this as a child, I was very emotional. Unfortunately, we have a whole lot more Godzilla after this, thankfully. It isn't the real end of the franchise here. But at number 1, the original Godzilla, the film that kicked off this iconic franchise, is a pure bona fide masterpiece in my eyes. Even almost 70 years later, everything about the film still is effective with how it showcases cinematically this bleak look at the horrors inflicted on Japan through the lens of Godzilla, who is just absolutely terrifying in this film, being the physical embodiment of all of that trauma. It's grim, horrific, and intense, but effective at getting its message across. But there you have it. That is my ranking of all 37 films in the Godzilla franchise so far. Toho, America, the animated films. It's a lot of films, but I had a blast talking about a whole bunch of Godzilla on the channel with you guys. And like I said earlier, make sure you share your rankings down below. How would you rank every film in the Godzilla franchise? Whether you've seen all the films or just rank all the films that you have seen, because it is quite a daunting task to watch every single film. Either way, make sure you leave your rankings in the comments section down below, because part of the fun of this is having that conversation with you guys in the comments section. Thank you guys, as always, for checking out the videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel so you're up to date with reviews, reactions, rankings, unboxings, and more. But next time, see you guys later.